A few weeks ago, Modern Vintage Gamer told me about a project that he was working on, and it would be for a video where he showcased the PSP, the PlayStation Portable, the original Sony handheld that came out next to the DS, and it is a really cool system then, and you know what? It's still a cool system now, but when he told me that his video would include results from an upgrade to the screen, I was very interested in the process, being able to do it. How difficult is it exactly? So after seeing his video, which was great if you want to see what some of the results are and on a lot of the software side for the PSP, I decided to order a screen, one of these IPS replacements, and then also shop in the recycling bin, which is basically the as-is section on eBay, and pick up what's supposed to be a broken PSP, I guess. No description with it, so that should be fun, and well, we'll install this IPS screen and see exactly how difficult it is. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. So here's the PSP that I got, and I did pick it up on eBay. The listing was one that was selling like 8 or 9 of these things, so kind of a grab bag here. Figure we check it out, and for the most part, it did charge completely after I plugged it in, left it charging for about an hour, turned on fine, and even around the PSP, it looks fairly good. The front part with that plastic over the screen has a pretty big scratch on it, but I do have a new front shell that I'm going to replace with anyway, so not a big deal. On the back, there's little scratching maybe around where that silver circle is for the UMD. Otherwise, though, it has the cover for the battery. The battery is a Sony battery, and it has the warranty sticker still intact, so if everything seems functional here, I may have gotten pretty lucky on this one. It is missing the thumbstick cap, once again. Easy thing to pick up online for $1 or $2 and just replace it. Anyway, after powering it on, the screen looks good. The D-pad works fine, as well as all of the buttons. I popped a game in, and it does seem to read. At first, it was reading kind of slow. I just took some compressed air and cleaned out inside of the UMD drive area, and it read Ghost Recon no problem. So maybe it's cosmetic flaws, maybe because that little thumbstick cap is missing. Or maybe I just got lucky with this pickup, especially at the price point on this one. That's not bad. And since all we're really doing here is replacing the screen, getting into it is pretty easy. There's a couple of screws on the back. We have 4 black screws and 2 silver screws. The silver screws are very important, these being under the battery, to remember where you got them from, all right? Because if you put one of the black screws where those silver screws go, the black screw will go through the back of the PSP and will actually hit your screen, breaking it, obviously. So make sure you map those out, but if you forget, the silver screws here go on the inside, and they would be the shorter ones. On the bottom, there is one other longer silver screw, and after you remove them, the entire front of the PSP, that shell, just pulls off. At which point, all we have to do is remove the bottom button board that goes along the screen. It's kind of wedged on one side, so I'll just kind of pry it up on the left, and then just lift it over and unclip it where that ribbon cable plugs in. The screen, similar thing, where it's kind of wedged between some metal brackets, and once you get one side up, the whole thing pulls towards you. Then you can see the ribbon cables behind the screen, one being very, very thin, the other one being much larger. The larger one is the data that goes to the LCD, and to my understanding, the thin cable is the backlight. So be careful with both of these ribbon cable plastics because they are known to break. They're kind of fragile. I would just basically put pressure on both sides of that larger piece, just kind of pry it up maybe with 2 fingernails, and it should pop up okay. As for the other one, just very carefully lift it. It kind of lifts from the opposite side of where it plugs in, and then once you remove them, go ahead and set those back down so nothing weird happens where you accidentally clip one of them off. Now let's take a look at the IPS screen that we're going to be replacing this with. This is a 4.3-inch LCD. They had 2 options. One was for 500 nits brightness. This one is 1,000. So I did go for the one that was brighter, mostly because I wanted to see the full effect here and what we could get out of this PSP with the IPS screen. The kit basically has the screen, some terrible looking instructions. I mean, really, the font for which motherboard you have and kind of where to bridge isn't great. And then we have an adapter cable, which will allow us to plug this newer screen into the board for the PSP. Now, I did mention those instructions. What it's pointing to is a spot on the board that has to be bridged. You can do this through blobbing solder onto those 2 points, as they are probably close enough to do that, or you can use a very thin strand of wire. I opted to use a thin strand of wire because I was trying to blob solder onto the board and it just wasn't working. Also, there are a lot of components around that area that I was trying to connect, so I didn't want to try to blob too much solder and then maybe pull one of those components away with it. Once I got the strand of wire down, it was pretty easy to do, but I understand this could be a sticking point for someone who's not comfortable doing soldering. I will say this is probably on the easier side. The only thing that's kind of going to trip people up, I feel like, is that it is small. So get the magnifying glass and have a lot of patience with this one. Now we get to plug our screen in with that adapter cable. And the adapter cable you'll see is set up to plug into both of those clips. The larger one is pretty straightforward. However, that smaller one that would be the backlight, it goes in maybe further than you'd expect technically. So I had clipped it in originally about halfway without realizing it, and I had to go back and push it in just a little bit further. It does get some pressure, maybe because it's a little larger than what the typical bracket is used to having with that old screen. But once I seated it correctly, plugged the new screen in, which again goes then into that adapter on the opposite side, sat it down, it started right up. It also comes with this foam outline to go around the metal part of that LCD. I had a little bit of issue with this because I ended up stretching it out a bit as I was trying to push it down. So I clipped a few spots and just kind of puzzle pieced it together, and it worked out okay. The idea is just to make it so that there is a slight gap between that LCD and the front shell after you screw it in. Also, I noticed that the screen is slightly smaller, so it almost rattles around a little bit in that bracket. When I did have it all closed up, though, it wasn't noticeable or anything, so after you get it all screwed in tight, it does grab the screen well enough. Now, I did mention that I was going to replace that front shell, and these shells are very easy to find on eBay. They're like $10 or so, and I just had to transplant all of the buttons, the D-pad, the bottom button piece, and that joystick, at which point it was good to go. So then after putting the screen in with the adapter cable, soldering that little wire, and then putting the new shell on top, screwing it together, it looks really good. Now, the nice part is when you replace it with that front shell, you're essentially replacing half of the PSP that you're going to see, right? The whole front half. The back, you're not going to see as much. Fortunately, this one didn't look too bad, but once you have that new shell in place and you don't have too much dust, we'll say, that was left behind underneath of it on the screen, it comes together really nicely and looks almost brand new. I will be getting a new cap for that thumbstick, but it's taking a while to ship. However, at this point, I'm able to turn it on and sort of check out the new screen. And the biggest thing that I notice immediately is how bright it is, and I would say how vibrant the colors look compared to the older screen, as well as I would say a lessened ghosting effect, which is something that the original PSP 1000 is known for, is when you're doing or playing games that has a lot of movement and you're moving around quite a bit, whether it's characters on screen and platformers or sort of the third or first person shooter movement, you'll see this ghosting effect trail your characters or some of the objects on screen, but it is significantly less here with this newer IPS LCD. And I am a big fan of breathing new life into these older systems, and even something as simple as this, which doesn't go as far as putting an HDMI port into a system and soldering it down to the board or anything. No, this is a more straightforward LCD replacement with parts that aren't outlandishly expensive, and I think adds quite a bit to the experience for the PSP. I can't speak on the 500 nit brightness LCD, but with what I'm seeing here with the 1000 pumped all the way up, it makes a lot of these games look way better. And I would say it's probably worth going this far if you are someone who likes the PSP 1000. I understand that the PSP 2000 and 3000 has their benefits. The biggest one being it's like twice the amount of RAM. Obviously, it's lighter, it's thinner, and for me personally, out of the three variants, I do really like the PSP 2000, but I still have a soft spot for the original PlayStation Portable and what it was able to bring to the market at the time. So yeah, it's a lot of fun to be able to drop a new IPS screen in there so the games look even better on it. I had mentioned that pricing was pretty good for this modification, and if you look on Amazon for this PSP screen, which I'll link down below in the description, it was $35, and at the time I was able to get it prime shipped, so it only took 2 days to get to me. The PSP that I got lucky getting on eBay was $30, and in fact, just a quick search shows that broken screen PSP 1000s are consistently around $30 to $35. It is a roll of the dice because there can be other problems with it, or you might need other accessories to go along with that broken system like a battery, but if you consider the fact you could have a PSP 1000 set up with an IPS screen for $70 or $80 with all of this included, that's not bad for a system that has a really good library and a very solid homebrew community behind it. But all in all, it wasn't too bad of an upgrade. The process is relatively easy with the PlayStation Portable in terms of getting it apart, since once you get the front shell off, the screen is there immediately. It's a bit more difficult when the soldering becomes involved. Even though it's 2 points, it is fairly small, and I had a hard time getting any kind of solder to blob on it, so it basically came down to using a very thin piece of wire, and even that can be kind of a whole process depending on the tools you have available. It's very unfortunate because if it wasn't for that, this would be a very, very easy upgrade for most people to do, but I guess if you really want to make this happen for a PSP 1000, pick up a decent enough soldering iron with a fine tip, some tweezers, very thin wire, and just hope for the best. But you know what? Outside of that, the cables all went together well, and everything fit fine, even when all screwed together. So the results, I think, are awesome, and the PSP is still a really cool system to have because most people, of course, modify it. The library is huge, and there's a lot of games that I'm sure many people have not played at all on the system. And then you get into some of the homebrew stuff, emulators, ROMs, etc. But I like the modification with the IPS screen. I think the 1000 brightness option looks great on the PSP. I haven't really had a chance to see what it does to battery life, as the battery that I have was the one that came with it, so that's probably not the best when it comes to just the overall performance of the screen, since the battery itself is degraded heavily. I'd probably end up getting an extended battery anyway and replace it, and well, I'm sure it'll probably be decent enough there. But let me know what you guys think about this down below with the IPS modification. Have you yourself done it, or after seeing this video, are you going to attempt it? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.